Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week we return to the Pentamerone for two stories, The Garlic Patch and Rosella. Let's start with Burton's summary of the Garlic Patch. Bellucia, daughter of Ambrosio de Lavara, being obedient to her father and acting prudently in his commands, becometh the wife of a rich youth, Narduccio hight, the firstborn of Basilio Gualaccia. Her sisters, being poor, are dowered by Basilio and given in marriage to his other sons. So there's a farmer called Ambrosio, and he's very poor. He has only a forest of garlic to his name, and he has 7 daughters to support. His best friend, Basilio, is rich and has 7 sons. Now, in the parts of central Queensland where I come from, there would have been a pretty obvious ending to this story right here, but sexism raises its ugly head. Basilio's eldest son, Narduccio, who he loves the most because medieval people are monsters, gets deathly ill. Sorry, I think my own jokes are funny, what can I say? No amount of money spent on his cures seemed to help him. The father asks his friend, "Do you have kids?" and Ambrosio is too embarrassed to say that he has daughters, so he lies and says he has 4 sons and 3 daughters. Basilio says, "You'd be doing me a great favour if you sent one of your sons to cheer my son up." Ambrosio, instead of saying, "I'm a bit sexist and I lied," instead goes home to his girls and asks each one in turn to cut her hair, dress like a man and pretend to be male, to keep the handsome rich bachelor company. In a distinct show of spirit, the first 6 tell him no. His eldest says that cutting her hair is a sign of mourning and she'll chop hers off when he's dead, so over his dead body. The second says she's not even married, so she won't cut her hair like a widow. The third says she's always been told that women should never wear breeches. The fourth one does a quick cat impersonation and says she won't fish for cures where the chemists have failed. The fifth says to tell the man to cure himself, for she won't give a single hair for 100 threads of men's lilacs. The sixth says she was born a woman, will live a woman, and will die a woman. And the seventh, a shy and retiring girl who knows that the rest of her sisters have refused, says yes. She says if her father needs it, she'd be willing to change her shape into an animal. They'll then cut off her blonde hair and put her in an old coat and head for Rosella, where Basilio lives. Narduccio, not being an idiot, sees that his new companion is a woman. He thinks she's been sent as a marital snare, and this makes him sad. His condition worsens. His mother, Cola, then goes on about how much she loves him for a couple of paragraphs to get him to spill the beans. Narduccio says he believes his new companion is a woman, and unless he can marry her, he's decided to die. Oddly, his mother does not tell him to wake up to himself, but plots to discover if the land is cropped or full of trees. You'll need to pardon me here, but how full of trees? How many trees is a man supposed to have in his trousers? No, let's move on. The mother designs a test. She says, "Narduccio, we'll get your new companion to ride the wildest pony we've got, and if she's a woman, she'll go white and nearly faint from fear," apparently. This plan fails before Belluccia's Olympic standard dressage skills, and Cola says to her son, "Look, clearly that's a guy. That's the best horseman anyone's ever seen." And Narduccio is still convinced, so strongly that not even a Scanabrecco can drive it from his head. Presumably that's popular biographies of Scanderbeg? I don't know. That was a bit of a literary hit in the 15th century. His mother sees that he's still obsessed and comes up with a second test. The mother sends for a gun and demands Belluccia load and shoot it, and she does, and Narduccio, discovering he has a kink for pentathletes, is filled with longing and desire. The mother says to her son, "Look, women just can't do this," and her son answers with some sexual wordplay, saying that this graceful tree will give him a fig, and then he'll give a fig to all the doctors. The fig here is representative of female genitalia and a rude hand gesture that is meant to look like genitalia. He also says that he will lose strength daily until he has her, and that if he cannot find a way to a pit, he will fall into another kind of pit. This mother and son, it seems, are sex-positive to the point of having no boundaries. The mother returns with more wordplay, but basically her plan is this. Go swimming with him and see if he has a Circus Maximus or a Trajan's Column. He continues with the wordplay, but by this stage it's really tedious to a modern reader. Must have been edgy stuff at the time. Narduccio gets one of his father's apprentices to hide in the bushes with the instructions to wait until they're in the water and then come out and say, "Your father's dying," so that she rushes out of the water and he can take a peek. The apprentice mistimes it, so they haven't fully undressed, let alone entered the water, before he delivers the message, and she leaves, and Narduccio apparently gets both anemia and jaundice for the lack of her. Remember, this sort of thing is considered attractive in princes at this time. Princess and the P again. The more sensitive you are, the nobler you are, the superior human you are. It seems very difficult to believe these sorts of people lead armies. Moving on. Narduccio's mother comes in and points out that, and by doing this she saves his life, points out that he can just go to the house, rush in impolitely, so she doesn't have time to change clothes, and see if she's a woman. And he recovers some of his colour, and loses some of his other colour, and goes off to try the plan, but the father manages to delay him, and Belluccia changes clothes. Fortunately for the reader, she forgets to take out her earrings, so her gender is revealed, and Narduccio asks Belluccia to marry him, and the father answers, "If your father's good with it, I'm 100 times good with it," which is horrible, because we never actually hear Belluccia say yes. Still, it seems she's up for it in the story, so they go to the dad's house. He's fine with it. Basilio's just puzzled what all this cross-dressing's been about. When his friend explains that he didn't want to be known as, quote, such an ass that heaven had sent him 7 daughters, end quote, Basilio decides that the best way to sort all of this out, given that he's rich and has way too many sons, is to just marry all the sons and daughters off in a single service. This saves him money on weddings, of course, but I presume he saw what a whiny pain in the ass his oldest son was, and decided he's not going to put up with that every year for the next 6 years. We end on a wedding with a big dance number, so it's better than 7 brides for 7 brothers, which is where I thought we'd end up. Why is this called the Garlic Patch? I don't know. I presume it's some sort of double entendre. It's that kind of book. Rosella. Burton's take on this is, a sultan is recommended to bathe in the blood of a great lord, and he sendeth his folk to seize a prince. His daughter falleth in love with the prisoner, and they fly together. Her mother followeth them, and her hands are cut off. She dieth of grief, cursing her daughter, so the prince forgetteth her. After various ruses and tricks played by her, her husband remembereth her once more, and they live and enjoy themselves happily together. Notably, in Burton's translation, he's cut out part of the story so that it only appears in the summary. There is a sultan, and he has leprosy. His doctors can't cure him. They tell him to do an impossible thing so that their professional standing won't be harmed. Bathe, they advise, in the blood of a prince. A great prince. Not some random dude. The Sultan sends out his fleet and a network of agents, and eventually they kidnap Polluccio, the Prince of Fontecchiaro. They take him to Constantinople, so presumably this story is after the invasion. The doctors get together and agree that they're in trouble, and that when the Sultan bathes in the blood and the cure fails, they are for it. Sorry, Chief, they say, he's so sad at being captured, it's made his blood melancholic. That's no good for leprosy, that melancholic blood. You need to give him time to chill out and brighten up. Get him sanguine, and you'll be Apple's boss. He needs good food and good company. Party on, my Sultan, party on. They then, if they have any sense, sell everything and move to Alexandria, but they don't because they turn up later in the story. The Sultan believes this, and he says, fair enough, and he puts the prince in a paradisial garden where it's always spring and there are beautiful fountains and birds call and cool breezes blow. The Sultan also sends his gorgeous daughter Rosella, with the implication that the prince may marry her at some point. This gets his blood pumping, but in a twist the Sultan did not see coming, because he's genre blind, his daughter falls for the captive. The lad having perked up a lot, the Sultan gets his doctors, who still haven't headed for the hills, and he tells them it's time for his bath. Rosella discovers the whole plan via the arts of geomancy taught to her by her mother. She's not well pleased and gives her bow an enchanted sword and a warning. She says to him, head to the coast, and because of the sword the sailors will treat you like an emperor. Hide out, wait for me. Polluccio, given the previous option was becoming body wash, gets right on the plan and flees. Rosella casts a spell upon a paper, slides it into her mother's pocket so that her mother falls deep asleep, and then she collects a large bundle of jewels and other valuables and hightails it to the boat. You'll notice we've seen this writing on paper sleep spell before in one of the other stories. The Sultan goes to the garden. No prince, no daughter. He can't wake his wife even by pulling her nose. He calls her handmaidens and says the queen's had a fit, give her a cool bath. When they undress her, the spell is broken, and she's not well pleased. She runs to the sea, throws a leaf on the water, and it turns into a ship. She gives chase. Rosella can't see her mother yet, but she knows she's coming. She says, Hey, Paul, go stand in the stern, and when you hear grappling chains, shut your eyes and just go to town with the magic sword, okay? I mean, just wreck anything that comes in reach. In a lucky hit, when the battle's joined, he slashes off the Sultana's hands. She heads home, has some final words to the king, and then her spirit goes to pay the one who taught her the dark arts. The Sultan dies of grief. When they arrive in Fontecchiaro, Polliccio says, "Wait here while I go and tell my rents I'm not dead, and I get you an entourage babe." As soon as his foot touches the ground, however, he forgets Rosella exists. Rosella waits for 3 days, then works out Polliccio's had his memory wiped, and it's time to sort that out. I am starting to hate this trope, because I feel like this is the 3rd or 4th time we've seen it in the Pentamerone. Rosella rents a palace opposite the palace. Is that how palaces work? I don't think so. Anyway, moving on, Polliccio is having a heck of a time. Feasts, parties, so forth, sonnets, music, inebriation is the way of the night. Rosella tells a knight of high birth that if he brings her 1,000 ducats and a complete raiment, which means cool clothes, she will give him proof of her affection. He borrows the money at high interest rates and hands it over because he's a bit of a fool. Rosella meets him in the bedroom and tells him to close the door before he comes to bed. Each time he shuts it, it opens again, and he does this for hours and hours and hours until the day returns. Rosella satirizes him for wanting to open her casket of love but not being able to close a door, and he leaves in shame. The next night, she pulls the same trick with a baron who pawns all of his goods to get the money together, and she tells him to blow out the candle and come to bed, but it won't go out because each time he blows it, it's as though his breath is coming from a bellows, and it makes the candle brighter, and she sends him on his way with mockery. And then she pulls the same trick on a 3rd night, this time by having the man comb knots out of her hair for the entire evening. Slightly later, one of the men is complaining of his fate in a salon, and he's overheard by the mother of one of the other men, and they agree that a problem shared is a problem halved. As they're discussing it, they find the 3rd man, and the 3 of them form a league of vengeance, which decides to tell the king. The king sends for Rosella and says, "What makes you think I'll let you get away with making fools of my courtiers?" And she says, "I did this to avenge a greater wrong." But she says it in a paragraph because that's how the Pentamerone goes. He asks her what she's talking about, and she gives her life story without identifying the prince. The king then says that ingratitude is a terrible sin, seats her nobly, and asks for the name of the man who wronged her. She takes a ring off her finger and says, "The one whose finger fits this ring is the unfaithful traitor who wronged me." And then it flies straight to the prince's finger, and when it lands on it, it restores his memory. He begs her forgiveness, and she says that's not necessary because he was under her mother's curse. The king decides they need to marry right away, but pauses to have Rosella baptized, and I have no idea why she ripped off those 3 guys. The moral that is given in the Burton version is, "Ever with time and straw thou mayest see the medlar ripen." Medlars are a fruit that's used as a symbol for female genitalia in medieval writing. This is the sort of sly joke that no longer works. Your saga may vary.